awareness. Work pressure, study pressure, toxic work cultures, and the pandemic, all of these can be triggers for suicide. The topic today is grim, but we need to discuss this. It demands our attention because when the futures of our hardworking and bright students are at stake. Recently, at the premier institution, Indian Institution of Science, four students over the year of 2021 took their own lives. And now this, according to reports, this figure beats the national average. To discuss how things got this way and what are the solutions, I'm being joined today by Anisha Kalra, who's a graduating PhD scholar from IISc itself, and a professional psychologist, Hansa Mohan. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here today. Anisha, if I can begin with you. You have studied there, you've worked there at IISc. Can you tell me about your experiences and those of your peers and describe what the work and study culture there is like?
I joined IISc in August 2015. So it's almost 6+ years since I've been associated with the institute. And there's a reason why it has been ranked as one of the most premier, or actually the NIRF ranking one research institute in India for the last years, I think, if I'm not wrong. So the work and study culture is amazing. We have an amazing set of faculty members to support us always. How it typically goes with PhD students is that you have to do about an year-long coursework. So you have to take up some courses for the first year of your PhD. And then from the second year onwards, you actually start up with the research. I wouldn't say that there is no stress, directly coming to the topic that we are talking about today. I wouldn't say that it's a stress-free environment, but there isn't a whole lot of stress either. I think the amount of stress that any PhD student faces anywhere in India or across the world, I think it is in itself a stressful field. You have to be associated. So it's not something that gives you results like, in 2 years you have to do, say, so and so number of courses and you get your degree. Or in 3 years, you just have to pass a certain number of courses, which a lot of people along with you are doing. So you don't feel alone, when you're, say, for example, enrolled in a master's program, or you are doing, say, a management degree or a bachelor's program or something like that. Because you have other people who are taking up the same courses. Everybody's sort of having the same journey. With PhD, for the first 1 year, I think it is quite similar for most people. But then everybody sort of digresses to their own research areas. And you have people within the group that you interact with. You have your faculty members that you very actively interact with. And I can say from personal experience that I've always, whenever I've had any difficulty, it's not just related to my research life or, even, personal issues. I have always had immense amount of support from my faculty advisors. So I've never felt as if, I did not have the support that I was looking for. But having said that, it is a difficult journey. And I think every student somewhere or the other in 5+ years of your PhD, you do tend to, face these issues. Everybody does face that. Where the problem comes is when somebody starts feeling that they are, they are the only ones who, in this struggle, they're alone and they don't have anybody to discuss it with. That is where problem starts, coming up, because there can be problems not only with your professional life, but a lot of people, the average age group of people that are pursuing PhD anywhere across the world is typically larger than undergraduate or postgraduate programs. So, there are also people who have to support their families financially. So you can have that sort of pressure. Then you also have the pressure of, publishing enough papers or, probably defending your PhD thesis in the time that's given to you. Then every research problem differs from the other significantly. So it's not as if, we're all in the same journey, but the challenges can be very different for, different people. So for example, in my case, the first few results for my PhD came very quick. So, I started, I think 9 months after joining IISc, I started doing the experimental work, and very quickly I had the first paper coming. But after that, it took me, there was this dead period. There was this dead time in which I didn't get any result. There are many
Okay.
people who, for whom it takes, like, the first few years they don't get anything, and then, they're very efficient with how they publish and how they get the results out in the subsequent years. So the journey is very different. And since it's, a lot of work, you have to put in a lot of work to get the degree. A lot of times what tends to happen is that you don't have enough time to interact with your peers or interact with friends. So the culture is that we do not have a significant amount of interaction in the hostels. For example, the hostel that I lived in the same room for say 5 years, and I did not have a significant amount of interaction with the girls who lived, in the rooms next to me. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a single boarding sort of a thing, and we don't interact a lot with other people because everybody, for example, has their own timelines. There's no in and out time because everybody works in their labs as per their own convenience. So, for example, I was somebody who woke up late, and I used to spend time in the labs late at night because it was peaceful then. So I preferred working very late. So what that
Okay.
did was that by the time I was back to my hostel room, there weren't a lot of people who were up by then. The ones that, there were some people I saw or I exchanged pleasantries in the corridor, but that was limited. My interaction was there, that was limited to that. Whatever few friends I had was the people I worked with, and again some people from the department, or maybe one or two people who I knew before I joined IISc. So
Okay.
that I think is one of the probably more common reasons why you don't have a lot of significant friendships, for example, and you tend to feel that you're alone in this journey when that's
Okay.
not actually the case. Yeah.
Does the institute encourage people? Does it encourage social activities, or is it more about work and study?
No, it's actually not like that. We do have a lot of social activities that happen on the campus. There is an annual fest, and then every festival. So there are local, groups. So there's a group of, say, Punjabi people who celebrate Lori and other North Indian festivals with like great pomp and show. And then, every festival, for example, every regional festival is also celebrated with a lot of vigor. It also
Mhm.
does depend a lot on individual preferences. Like what tends to happen is for most of the people, no, I wouldn't let me not generalize it by saying for most people. I think for
Fine.
a
Yeah.
lot of people, what happens is that they have joined their PhD program after they have, done, say, an undergraduate and a master's degree. So they
Yeah.
already have had a lot of fun during their UG and PG times. So when they come to IISc, they themselves have a lot of more emphasis on work. I mean, they tend to focus more on their work as opposed to, joining all these events that are happening. So I wouldn't say that these events attract less participation, but again, there is a large section of people who prefer not to indulge in any other social activities, and they just try limiting their attention to work.
Okay.
So yeah.
Before I come to you, Hansa, I just want to ask Anisha one more question so that you know the premise. Then I'll seek your opinion on what more IISc can do to help the students. So, Anisha, can you tell me where the students are generally from, and basically what is their background, financial background, social backgrounds? I know
I
this is
think it's
generally
very
speaking, but
it's very diverse. It's very diverse. It will be very difficult for me to pinpoint. There are people from all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds, all sorts of regional backgrounds. We have a large representation from South India, from North India. So I think it's very difficult for me to pinpoint and say where people are. And I feel that their geographical or socioeconomic condition has to do less with the cases that have happened. Again, I mean, I wouldn't take away from the fact that what has happened is very unfortunate, but I again feel that the fact that it's higher than the national average, I think it's unfortunate, but I think it's just a sheer unfortunate coincidence that over the last 1 year, so much of I mean, four people unfortunately had to end their lives, and a lot of it, I think, also had to do with the pandemic. I believe because before that, you irrespective of however little interaction you have, you still used to go out with people to the mess. Just
right.
talk to them while you're just commuting through the campus, or talk to people in the labs. Now, when that interaction was restricted, that
Hmm.
is when I think a lot of people started having, There was probably filled up with emotions, and in the spur of the moment, I believe a lot of these things ended up happening. I wouldn't say that there was no build up. I believe that a lot of it would have been prevented had in that one moment if they had gotten one person to probably speak to, I think a lot of it could have been prevented.
Okay, Hansa, coming to you now. Like Anisha said, maybe the data could be coincidental, but the issue we're talking about is larger. It's about student suicides at premier institutions, students who are aspiring, who are hardworking, and they are bright. So, and before that, before talking about the larger issues, I also want to ask you, because once the news came out that 4 students over the year took their own lives, what IISc did as a first response was it started removing the ceiling fans from hostel rooms and started installing wall fans. So, do you think, as a first step, this is a good response? And what more solutions should IISc be working on now that you have an idea of the kind of work culture the place has and the kind of stress the students are under? What is your
So, a little off the topic, if I may just make one correction, the name is Hansa Shawny.
okay?
All right. But I mean, there are quite a few things that you've asked in that question. The first thing that strikes me is what you said was premier, right? It is a premier institute. Now, I've worked with schools for a while before I had my own private practice, and it's not. I mean, the sheer amount of pressure that you are experiencing right from the time that you're in school to be able to get into an institute itself is really big. And from what I understand, a lot of these institutes, I mean, even if we look at a span of like in the past 10 years, a lot of these institutes that we're also looking at are science-based institutes, right? They either have to research or technology, but it's primarily the science field. Now that's really telling. You've got Premier and you've got Science, right? You already start seeing it back when they're in school, right? So there's a lot of pressure. All of a sudden, it's not just about how bright you are or how intelligent you are. It's also about the fact that you have 24 hours in the day. You have so much to do. If you're not on top of everything, you're not going to make it. So in school itself, you start seeing a certain kind of training towards that. But what you also see is an immense amount of stress. Getting into an institute itself is very difficult. Getting into a premier institute is even more so, right? So the kind of pressure that you're looking at these kids are having is massive. And as far as the question about, the first response being feeling time being removed, I mean, makes sense. As strange as it may sound, for us, it's like if somebody is really bent upon it, what's a ceiling fan going to do stop them from doing? But when we look at individuals who are showing signs of suicidal ideation, that's one of the first things that we do. We basically suicide proof the environment. You want to make sure that there is not anything in the environment that may aid that attempt. Right? So in that sense, as an immediate effort, it's definitely understandable that the institute would do that. But in the long run, of course, it's very minimal. It's not an and you're right. There are obviously going to be a lot of students who will be able to take in the pressure that comes with studying, and they're able to keep afloat. But there are a lot many who aren't, right? And that is why you also start seeing ideas of suicide coming up. It's not just an institute constantly there that these things are happening. So to sort of make sense of this, I see it in terms of the first aspect of the course to consider the fact that the people who are actually who had or who do attempt suicide, do they have any kind of background or history, background of history of anxiety or depression or any other kind of clinical issues that they may be facing? From what I understand, the matter is also based on what Monica is mentioning, um, there's definitely an aspect here that these kids who are going into these senior institutes, they're extremely hardworking, they're extremely driven, right? And they've been working hard for many, many years to get where they are. And then it happens, right? Now, what is it that, one aspect of it definitely is the fact that, what COVID has led to is pretty limited amount of interaction with each other having. And problem lies in the fact that, you spend years thinking, so this is what I have to do, this is my work, this is it, this is my goal, I have to get where I have to get there. And and often that kind of narrative is not just functioning in the student's mind, it's also something that functions in the student's mind and also the parents. Right? So now all of a sudden COVID happened, obviously restrictions were pretty good. But then that begs the question that what happens to you when you are living in a hospital and you can't meet the people that you have to even work, get anything else. There's very restricted interaction with people. What does it do to an individual? I think as a society we're not really recognizing the impact of this kind of social isolation on people and their mental. We are, and I won't say this as a cliche, like we're not just social beings, we're relational. The idea that our need to be able to relate, to connect to people is extremely strong. Our sense of self develops in relation to others. The first thing is the caregiver, and that only expands to, larger networks. So now suddenly students who not only are trying to build a career for themselves and an identity, they're also trying to build an identity. They're also trying to build a social network now, right? And suddenly all of that is taken away. You're not meeting people, you're not interacting with people. And secondly, as long as you just get through these academic years, it's fine. But we don't quite realize that, what is the impact of this kind of social isolation. You're already looking at students who are, the kind of pressure and academic stress that they face is immense. And understandably, so I won't say it's a bad thing. It helps with resilience. They chose this, and it is a field which demands that kind of resilience and hard work. So you definitely come into a very high stress environment. But now the buffers that can help you ease it are gone. Right? So how do you cope with something like that? And the problem is you don't really. So I guess the institute double bind also in that. It's like here, our parents are sending their kids there, right? We're answerable if our policies are too lax given COVID, right? If they ease those, then they're in trouble as well. But if they don't, you're looking at some kids who will definitely not be able to cope with this level of pressure. I mean, I'm not working with, I don't have a college student as client who at the moment, but I do have certain science students that I've worked with in schools, and they're already facing it. They're already hitting a burnout because they're in school the whole day in online classes, and after the online classes, they're doing coaching classes for the next class. Then they've got to revise everything, and at least meeting friends, at least those few breaks in between meant something. Those small little interactions, they're all gone. And some we can cope. I'm not saying that it's going to be an issue for everybody, but we need to keep in mind that there are people who are going to need immense support and help at a time like this.
True. Anisha, I just want to ask you, what kind of mental health care access, what kind of healthcare access is there on campus or whoever? Is there anybody available for people who want to talk out their feelings, some professional, I mean? And also, if when students access it and why would they hesitate?
Right. So yeah, there are facilities available. We have a wellness center in the institute. We have 2 psychologists, therapists who are always there on campus. So we have a health center for all the needs, in which we do have a small wellness center in which these psychologists, so you can always make an appointment through them online. And there are a lot of people. In fact, I was somebody who faced certain anxiety associated issues back in 2018. And we had a counselor on board, and I did have, a month-long session with her back then. After which, I think things were better for me, so I didn't find the need to go back to her again. But the problem, again, I think, and that sort of correlates with what Hansa was saying, was that you start feeling that you're alone in this. So while I'll just talk for myself. It's best I do that. When I was facing these issues, apart from maybe one or two close friends of mine, not a lot of people knew about that. And it was not that it was not a phase when I wasn't getting results. It was just, I mean, there was no reason on the academic front or personal front for that to happen. I had immense support from my advisors. I had immense support from my family. I was getting good results on the research front, but the environment of the place, or maybe for any place for that instance, when you're doing something for that long a time, say for example from 2015 to 2018, it's close to 3 years for me. So there are times when you start to get, saturated with certain things. You don't understand why you're doing a certain thing for that longer period, or if it's even fruitful for you to, spend so much of time doing something. And there are times when you lose passion for your work or something like that. I mean, there doesn't have to be. You don't need to have a reason to feel a certain way, for example. I realized that I need help, and it took me time to find courage to go and speak to a counselor. But in the hindsight, it was a great decision, because in those couple months, my efficiency had dropped considerably. And it was not just that. I mean, I wasn't happy with whatever was happening. Even when I used to get good results, nothing really made me think, made me feel positive about that. So that discussion with the counselor helped. But the fact remains that I didn't speak to a lot of people about it. So, for most other people who used to see me at my sitting place every day, they would still be feeling that, maybe everything's perfect in her life. She's getting results and she's publishing papers and everything. But nobody really knew the amount of courage it took me to, push me out of my hostel room every day and get me to the hostel, or get me to my, sitting place, and get me to the lab where I had to do those experiments. Some people might have noticed it, but obviously nobody came and spoke to me about it. I didn't go and speak to anyone outside my, bubble of 2, 3 people. So that is what the problem is, that we tend to feel that we are the only ones who are facing these issues. There are a lot of, resources that IISc has made available. There are sessions that happen I mean, and this is not only in the past 1 year. There have been sessions organized with therapists, with the people from Nimhans, for example, regularly. And this is a regular practice. But the amount of people who actually come to these sessions is very small. Number is still very small. A lot of people don't think that this is something that needs help, and then in that one moment, I think it becomes so much that they end up taking their lives. I don't know. I shouldn't be speaking for them, because I don't know what actually transpired.
No, so, we have Hansa. We'll pose that to her. In fact, Hansa, you're the professional here, and you've dealt with clients who are students who've gone through such experiences. So, I mean, your clients come to you, but how do you draw out the students to come and speak to professionals? Like Anisha just said, she herself made the initiative, but then how do you help those who don't know they need help?
That's a very tough question, and also slightly hard to answer it. I mean, you can't help somebody who doesn't want to help, and that's the most unfortunate aspect. You're right. It's very difficult to get some people to come to therapy. They just don't want to come. They'll be pushed by their parents. They'll be pushed by their friends. They'll come to a session on it, but if they're not keen on it, you can't keep them. And that. So the thing is that at least in school, because I also work there, the narrative is changing. You are seeing students now more open to the idea of group work, of coming along, working with therapists, and the counselor coming into an entire class and addressing the entire class on different kinds of ideas. And a lot of students after that would be well. But I think there is still a lot of resistance to any anything to do with mental health. You have work on one end, and then there are these. I don't know if these are voluntary, but if perhaps they are, if there's an option that you can go for something like this, most people will not. not only because they feel a certain sense of secrecy and shame and taboo around issues that they may have. Uh, there's just too much work. I mean, if I can get this time to just be by myself, or if I need to finish something, I'd rather do that than go for this. There's also a sense of priority that's placed on anything to do with mental health. And for everybody, I think that's really low. People don't really realize or recognize the value of mental health and what, things like the stresses that you're going through and social isolation. And it takes a lot of courage to recognize that this is really burning me and most people are not appealing. So
Um, yeah. So Hansa, I'm not only focusing on IISc, but several others. We hear of students' suicides in India very often, and often they're from these, high-ranking institutions. Even among people who are giving those exams, you mentioned how tough it is to anyway get into these places. It is agonizing to hear about them, of course, but you don't get to hear such tales of horror too often from premier institutions overseas. What do you think is fundamentally different in our study or teaching approach, our evaluating approach? Uh, does the problem lie in our education framework? What do you think the problem is?
see, I mean, I've not worked with institutes per se and college, postgraduate institutes, graduate institutes. So I don't want to comment on their educational policies or how they do. But I've generally seen a huge difference in terms of, like, if I look at this from school up till graduation, there is this huge shift, right? So you have very set amounts, like the curriculum is very fixed, it's very structured until you're in school. This is my curriculum, I study this, I have this book that I need to read, and I have this academic, that's about it, and I have these notes. It's very straightforward. And what's expected, you read, you mug up, and you just, put it out there in your examination. Suddenly, when you're in college, now there's this nice, really, like, work with students and telling them is that, the way you're preparing for your studies is really limited, and it's a huge problem because the minute you're going to come to college, you won't know what to do. Because now all of a sudden there's no textbook, there's no there's reference book. Each book is massive. There's multiple subjects. You need to go through multiple books to even find points you need to read one question. And now even universities are changing the way they evaluate, right? Like when I was in college, I remember we had a 10 years. You take the 10-year question papers, you go through them, you figure out, okay, these are come and you study. But that's also changing now. So now all of a sudden, kids aren't prepared for that kind of study. So from coming from where, okay, this is my curriculum, I just need to now study. My curriculum is massive. If I'm not on top of it from the beginning of the year, I can't make it. That's the truth of it. If you're not on top of it, you can't make it. And I think that's one disconnection between how they prepare, which is a massive problem. Another thing I think is also perhaps how the faculty may be perceiving, and I'm saying this with a lot of caution because, again, I'm not in touch with anybody or I've not worked with anybody who teaches in a university or an institute. That, how accessible are they? And yes, there are some people who really bright, who are really motivated, who will always find that accessibility. But there are always going to be those students who need it desperately, even need faculty who might actually literally pull them out of their sense of or need for anonymity. You really need a few faculty members who will be like that for students to also feel, okay, I can come up with my issues to faculty members. I think that's another thing. There is a limitation in approachability. There's a disconnect between how students are taught to prepare for their examination. And then there's also, the general attitude towards mental health. And also a lot of pressure that, sounds a bit too, there's a lot of pressure that comes from the parents. And I hate to say it, but you're not getting into a premier institute with parents just saying, oh, wherever you are, it's fine with you. Let's say parents are
Yeah.
very ambitious towards tech. They've probably been preparing them since ninth grade to, you have to get into these institutes or else there is nothing for you, so you're also looking at that kind of pressure that's been building up. So I do feel that it's never sudden. It is a slow build up in the sense that what do you believe your academic value or worth is? What do you believe your central value and worth comes from? How is
Yeah.
it built upon the institutes that you're going to go to? What do you believe is at stake if you don't make it? And where do you place your own sense of well-being vis-a-vis all of it? If you don't place it at some level of significance and importance, when stress hits it's going to all fall apart.
Anisha, I'll come to you for the last word. I want to know what kind of an impact these kind of incidents have on the student community, and how are they dealing with? And do you think the institute also needs some course correction as far as mental health is concerned?
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer because more of these cases have come up in the last 1 year. And as I said, I've been home all this while, so I haven't had a lot of interaction with people. But based on whatever limited interaction I've had, the effect has been both ways. So, of course, there are certain people who feel vulnerable when they hear such things. But then there are others who start realizing that now is probably the time they need to seek help. It will be very wrong to say that there aren't facilities available or resources available within the institute for that. Of course, there are resources available. One thing that probably, I wouldn't say that it's course correction on the part of the institute because they're already doing it. But I think it needs to be communicated a little more vigorously. So they have posters put up everywhere, near the messes and all the common areas where people tend to go more. But I am not sure because as a student myself, I wasn't very active in checking the posters in my hostel or near the messes. So I don't know if that does a whole lot of things. Again, they also send reminders, broadcast emails about all these events very frequently. But again, there are a series of broadcast emails that come to us every day. So it's very difficult to pay attention to that one particular email when you need to say find help. So one thing that probably can be done is to recognize if somebody needs help within your research group. So, as a community, as the like for the entire institute, I think it will be too much to ask for a certain specific number of people to just keep an eye on the entire institute and see such incidents don't happen, for example. But again, we all work in small research groups of say 15 to 20 people, and we have an advisor each. We have a huge group of students who are working under the same advisor, albeit on different research issues, but we are still working with the same person. So, I think we can be a little more sensitive again within our groups and see that, there are times when you understand that there is a certain someone in your group who I think needs help. But then there's the stigma around mental health. And I think there is that inhibition from your side that, the other person might get offended if I go up to him or her and ask, are you doing okay? Or do you need some help? Or would you want to talk about it? But it's not always the most interesting thing to say to somebody. So you tend to, just draw a line there, or probably, if he or she needs any help, they'll go and talk to their friends about it. A lot of times people are not able to do that. So I think we should, it's very commonly said over the past 2 years, I think, but I think we should, strive towards ending the stigma around mental health and make it I think just bring it a little more close to normalcy. You go to so many doctors, physicians when you feel a physical issue, right? Similarly, if you're not feeling something you're not feeling right about yourself mentally, it's okay to ask help. It's okay to go to people who go to professionals who know how to talk people out of negative situations. I might not be the best person to speak to if somebody is, facing an issue professionally, or somebody is having any personal issues back home that are leading them to have a lot of negative thoughts in their minds. But again, the professionals can talk you out of these situations. So there are resources available within the institute. They need to be probably communicated in a better way to the students. And also, I think faculty members, advisors, and other research group members should kind of keep an eye on, how how other people in the group are behaving. Sometimes you can pick up. I wouldn't say that you can't, but that you're too. There are inhibitions when you just don't go and speak in person. I think if that interaction is encouraged in some way, I think that will be really good that will go a really long way in sort of digressing certain people from those negative thoughts that tend to grip you at times. Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah.
Anisha, Karra, and Hansa Shanik, I thank you very much for joining this discussion today. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you're most welcome. It was a pleasure talking.